Hi there. Welcome to the Press Pause, a podcast by D-Term. My name is Sunčica. I'm your host today, and I'm here with Natalie, the head of global PR at HiBob. Welcome, Natalie, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
In today's episode, we'll be diving into the world of PR metrics. Because the public relations is all about managing a company and its relationships. But we want to know how are these metrics paying off, and today we're going to be discussing about these metrics that matter and how we can measure the success of our PR campaigns and just to understand the impact of our PR efforts. So for starters, Natalie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in PR?
Absolutely. Well, once again, thank you very much for having me. As you say, I look after the global press office for HiBob, but I've been in PR and communications for longer than I really care to remember, but well over 20 years now. And started out as a journalist and then sort of fell into the dark side after a few years of doing mainly music journalism. So really not much to do with technology. But once the dot-com era sort of took off, technology clearly became something that was all pervasive. So for me, it wasn't a huge leap to go from something that I found was fun and innovative to something else that was really innovative as well. So I've been doing PR for pretty much the whole of my professional career and work both in-house and agency side. I think it's important actually for PRs, especially in-house PRs, to have some agency experience. It really helps you distinguish between what we call the outward in and the inward out messaging. So sometimes when you're very much in-house, you end up only thinking through the blinkers and what the company wants and forget actually the press are not there for you. So that's in not so much of a nutshell my sort of background. So journalist first, then fell into PR literally, but it's been fascinating and it has come a long way since I started, I have to say that.
I mean, it always is kind of a journalism next to PR. It kind of always goes together. You know, I feel like all the people in this profession kind of tend to make that type of switch.
Very common.
I have a very similar path.
Okay, so you understand.
Yeah. So what are some of your interests outside of work?
Well, outside of work, I mean, I'm not particularly interesting myself, but I mean, I'm a big, keep fit fan. I've always been into, staying fit. I'm actually a trained yoga teacher. Back in, the day, I did something that was more than just a hobby. So I thought, it feels like more than just a hobby, so let's take it. So I've always been big into that. And music, obviously, has always been my first love. So I play the drums.
Oh, no way. That's super cool.
Yeah, my daughter doesn't think it's super cool, but I do. And I've, played other instruments as well, but the drums is the one that stayed. So, between sort of music and sport, that's the sort of thing that I tend to do to sort of decompress and just, it's my little private pleasures that I indulge in. Yes.
Yeah, of course, you can't go without those. I think we would all go crazy if we just did what we do at work. That sounds so cool. So what is you said your current role is you're the head of global PR. Could you tell us a little bit about your responsibilities and just your role?
Absolutely. I'm responsible really for the success of external comms for HiBob and the brand. And I deal exclusively with journalists and the press. So what I call editorial coverage. I leave paid and advertising to the marketeers. It's a completely different skill set. And by global, I mean, we have operations in just about every continent, but we have 5 key PR hubs. So we have North America, Europe, we have 2 hubs there, UK and Germany. We also cover the Benelux and Australia. I think I've got them all in there. There is an Israeli element to this, but it's Hebrew, it's very specific, and that's looked after by a colleague of mine that pretty much mirrors what I do but all in Hebrew. So yeah, cover all the corners of the earth really, where we are trying to establish ourselves as a brand, and bring that sort of disruptive nature of new technology to a very established sector, which is HR software. It's been around now for donkey's years, obviously evolved, but we're a very sort of digital first kind of company, focusing more on people than process. And I think the world's going that way anyway. But with HR technology, it is particularly now very much about the employee rather than the employer. The employer does benefit when the employee is best served. So that's the sort of approach that we take, and it's global, and it's very much a brand-led program that I look after.
I did a little bit of research about HiBob, and I noticed that it's in every area of the website. It's always mentioned that it's all of these HR tools are usually used by HR, but you do put a really big emphasis on the employees side of it. So I thought that was
Exactly.
pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's been described as sort of an Instagram front end and a Workday back end, and I know that the CEO is happy for that to be the way that it's described, because it is unique. It does feel very much like a social media platform, and it is for everyone, right from HR to managers to individual contributors, right through the whole of the workforce. This particular, this particular platform is for use by everyone in different ways, but it's not siloed. Everybody accesses it the same way. So
That's really
yeah.
That is really fun. So, an off-script question: how do you like your job? How is it going for you? How you said you were here for just 10 months?
Yeah, just 10 months. It's been good. I mean, I've been given a lot of freedom, I have to say. I've come to effectively a green field, where PR wasn't particularly strategic, if at all established. But HiBob has been a startup for quite a few years, and now it's become a scale up, having gone way past the unicorn status. So they were ready for a much more strategic approach to marketing and a more integrated approach. So I came into a marketing team that's very well established, and injected the element that is, a specialist area that you do sort of need somebody that knows how to take the marketing message and turn it into something that you can use with press. And they've given me complete freedom to set up the whole process and protocol behind that, help craft the messages, positioning, which again is slightly tweaked to what you would say to a marketing audience. So no, I have no complaints. They really have given me lots of rope, and so far I haven't hung myself. But there's plenty of time for that to happen.
I hope not.
Me too.
That sounds really really great when you have you can take care of all the things and set up things that weren't set up before, so you kind of have a clean slate. So to get into our topics, when you do compose these campaigns in PR, what metrics do you consider to be the most important for measuring the success?
My goodness, I mean, what a question. It's so loaded. It's almost impossible to know how to answer that. But I think you have to go back to, what does the business want from any marketing program? And usually it boils down to two things. One will be either pure brand awareness, we need people to know us, or it will be lead generation or demand creation. You can actually do both with PR with varying degrees of sophistication, because PR is so what we call top of the funnel. You don't even see the funnel. This is about that vortex of sucking people into that vortex where it becomes a black hole and they can no longer escape, nor do they want to, hopefully. So we're so far above the funnel that it has to start with brand awareness. And then you can get into, the more niche messaging, which might result in lead generation of branded search visits to your website. So for metrics, I always have to start with, well, what is it that you want from this particular campaign or piece of news? And invariably, it will be brand awareness. So if we start with brand awareness, then those metrics really boiled down to its essence has to be share a voice, because we compete with other competitors in our field for the same attention. We're all going after the same writers because we're all in that same space of people management, for example. So yes, it is share a voice. How many journalists decided to write exclusively about HiBob in that week or in that month versus our competitors? And that's a tall order. So it really keeps you very honest in terms of quality of your content and the strength of your news, because that's really where brand awareness lives. It's got to be quality content, insights, education, or very, very hard news. When you come onto the lead generation side, you can afford yourself a little bit of leeway there, where it can become more about brand value, product led value propositions, etc., which do not fly with the big broadsheets, for example. So yes, short answer is share a voice for brand awareness. And one piece in a very well read publication is worth 25 in trade, if that's what you're aiming for with that particular campaign.
Do you observe this metric through like on the global scale or on like different markets?
So there's no such thing as global, really, when you come down to it, when you talk about things like PR, because every publication is based in a country. They might be read internationally, but you'll find that those editors, say for the Wall Street Journal or for the Financial Times, will still need very specific information that is relevant to the readership of that sort of the country of its origin. So you'll find that when you go after things like Forbes or Wall Street Journal, if you don't have a US focus of some kind or stat, you're going to really struggle to get the attention of those writers. And similarly with things like The Guardian or the FT or the Australian or Handelsblatt, you have to make it relevant to their readership, because they don't owe us, brands, vendors, they don't owe us anything. They are there for their audiences. So it's what I call global. So I do go after global stats, but really they are made up by local information. So
Okay, that makes sense. So what role do qualitative metrics play in PR reporting, and how do you exactly measure them?
So qualitative very much comes back to the share of voice. Again, one piece in Forbes or one piece in Handelsblatt is worth 25 pieces in the trade. If you're looking for brand awareness, if you're looking for people to come and do branded search on your website, you're probably not going to get that from a piece in Handelsblatt or FT, because by its very nature, it's going to be very high level. And usually it will be something where we're inserting commentary into a piece of news that's already been written about. So, for example, in the UK recently, there was the new budget announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, in which they talked about more help for childcare. Childcare had become a business issue. Well, of course, we can talk about childcare from an HR point of view, because it's all about people, employee experience. It's about also DEI, leveling the play field for those people that are usually charged with more responsibility for the family. And I'm not saying it's all women, though it does tend to be. And we had a survey on women in the workplace that had a stat which asked, does your workplace provide childcare? And using that stat, we were able to get into the likes of the FT. Actually, it was the Telegraph, this particular example. But of course, that's not going to necessarily drive visits to our website, but that's quality. And the readership there is huge. So when you then go to measure how the impact of that particular article, in terms of share of voice, it will hit those metrics. And that's where it ends there. But yes, if you want, well, we'd be moving on to quality next, but as in quantitative, sorry. So I'll let you ask the question. I won't preempt that question.
Okay, so then how do you determine which metrics to track for a specific campaign?
So if we're not looking at awareness, where it would be qualitative, So,
Mm-hmm.
as explained, um, you you would be looking for quantitative. So, if you usually the types of news that brands such as HiBob might typically or more consistently be surfacing, there'll be corporate update news. Sometimes it will be product related, sometimes it will be a customer case study, but they're very niche and they appeal more to those trade publications that are either in the sector or in the vertical. So if we had a banking customer, we would hit both the software, technology, HR titles, as well as a banking title, because the story there will be relevant to both. Now, in those kinds of stories, you can be afforded a backlink, particularly if you're talking about a specific capability, and you might be able to link to a page on your website that gives more information. Not all press will allow that, but some do. But when you do have that, you're able to track a little bit more the impact to the business. But you need lots. So that's where the quantity comes. You need to get into lots of HR and banking and vertical and trades for there to be any real sort of commercial, if you like, metric there. Because as we know, that customer journey is very long. You need thousands and thousands of what we call MQLs for it to result in 1 or 2 clicks in the website, which might convert. So ideally, in best case scenario is that you have the kind of press office program whereby you can hit both quality and quantity with these different types of stories, so that at the end of the month you have share of voice, but you also have some metric on that appeals to the CFO. You can say, yes, from this month's activity with the press, we've had these many visits to our website, of which some resulted in further investigation. And then, the salespeople or marketing people take it from there, and it becomes a funnel, a nurture funnel.
So,
It's very hard, but that's the aim.
So in the case, for example, when you like you mentioned, if you cannot put a backlink or anything, how do you make sure that the data that you actually collect is reliable and accurate?
Well, in terms of reliability, the only real true element of collecting information for PR is the actual piece of coverage and what that publication says about itself in terms of its circulation. We are not able usually to attach tracking pixels or UTMs to our content. Generally speaking, because we distribute the content as a press release, and quality press don't just copy and paste press releases. They'll read it, they'll rewrite it, they might ask for an interview. There's that sort of thing. On occasion where they do copy and paste and there is a link there and they leave it in, well, that's a pretty straightforward way of measuring it, because you can just track your UTMs on Google Analytics, no problem, and see all the referrals. So it's a rigmarole to do true and accurate, in a commercial sense, measurements of performance. But by the nature of what we're working with, they are accurate in the very basics of where it appeared and how many people are said to read it. But we can't tell you that everyone that reads that publication will have read our piece. That's the bit where there's always that smoke and mirrors. Very difficult to explain to the C-suite, and often why PR is the first thing to go when there's efficiencies or reorgs in company, because it's the hardest thing to justify.
This number of readers, is this a data or a piece of information that you get from the papers or like the company that is posting the press release, or you have this data available somewhere else? How do you know what is the number of the people?
Well, actually, monitoring services will provide that, because they are the ones that clip the links for you, and they will provide information. Good monitoring services will give you the reach. It will give you the almost like the SEO rank value or the influencer value. So to say, this is a well-read publication, we give it a 7 out of 10. It depends how they do it. So you can get it from your own platform that you use for media monitoring, or there are websites that just tell you the readership of certain
Okay.
publications. Yeah.
Yeah, I figured is it maybe something that you would ask for from them, to let you know, and then you kind of be like, is this true? Is this information true or not?
Yeah.
But I guess, yeah, with other tools, you can always kind of make sure it's correct. So how do you use this data that you kind of collect to, inform your decision making and just like strategizing for future campaigns?
Yes, that's an interesting one. So often when you're in-house, particularly, you will have executives who feel that everything needs to be PR'd. Everything. Every bit of news needs a PR. And that's actually not true, because there are some things that simply don't work in the press. For example, awards press releases. That award will have been won by a number of companies, and the only press release that a journalist might be interested in is the one that comes from the award sort of company, rather than 25 versions of the same story with different, right? Now, I've spent my life trying to explain to companies, honestly, don't waste your time on those sorts of, let's use the time on quality insights or, data-led pieces of news or thought leadership. Let's not waste time on those. But I don't always win that argument. So when I'm able to show, not tell them that this doesn't work, and it shows when you put out the press release, nobody writes about it, and you can show that because in all of your media monitoring and Google searches, there isn't one single piece of coverage about that. That helps you say, next time, let's not do any of those this month. Let's use our time on what about thought leadership. Look at this one piece of thought leadership, how many times that was picked up, or it was picked up once by a really big publication. Let's spend our time on things that really deliver for us in terms of both quality and quantity. So it does inform, it does support me when I have those conversations, difficult conversations with executives who don't always understand that the press don't, you've got to give them a reason to care, and you winning an award along with 25 other companies isn't news. So there's that. But then, it is very useful. You can see the topics that worked, the topics that didn't, the kind of news that really drove quality, those that drove quantity, and you can start to, create your plan for the rest of the year where you make sure you insert these different tactics and assets. So you're not just sort of sitting there, what shall I do this month? You never have that problem when you know what delivered and what didn't. So that's why those metrics are, absolutely essential.
So how do you account for variables outside of PR that could affect the metrics that you're actually tracking?
Well, I think honesty and transparency, often the share of voice will be less than what you would have hoped for, even in a month where you had tons of stuff go out that really landed. But, we're up against companies that are listed, for example, companies that are well established with very well-known brands, and they are written about in business dailies from the point of view of their share prices. You will never compete with that. Quarterly financials, you will never compete with that, no matter how much you've got to talk about. If Handelsblatt, FT, Wall Street Journal, Reuters, Bloomberg have published the financial results of one of our competitors' quarterlies, and you're not in those, you won't be getting that share of voice. And that's quite easy to explain. The other thing to understand is bad news. Right, so some of our competitors have bad news. They've had layoffs, or there's been litigation or something. That makes the news more than good news, as we all know. Bad news always the first thing that the journalists want to write about. So sometimes if we don't have a bit greater share of voice, you can look to see exactly what drove that. And I always show the executives that receive my reports, don't despair, because the only reason that this competitor got more coverage is because they're going through a lawsuit. So let's be happy we're not competing with that. So it's quite easy, and I'm always very clear that with press, it's generally the outside in approach that works best. So if the press are already writing about it and you have something to say, that should be your first port of call, rather than to think that you can change or drive a news agenda. And frankly, unless you are Vladimir Putin, you are not going to be changing anyone's news agenda because you've got a piece of news or a product that you want to talk to the world about. So they do understand that. And again, the metrics, for example, the childcare story that I gave as an example, that shows them what I mean by the sort of outside in approach. And the other way I always explain it to certain people that just don't want to get it is to say, what's the point of giving a journalist a story about lemons if what they're writing about is oranges? They're just simply not going to. And even if you paid to put it into Orange Weekly, but yours was, Lemon Daily, the chances are that people who buy Orange Weekly buy it to read about oranges. So they're likely not even going to read that story about lemons. So it's about transparency, a little bit of sense of humor, and then metrics. Look at this. Did it work? No. Do we want to do it again? Should we? No. So they're very important. Reports always come back to save the day. They've got our backs because you can't argue with data.
I love that metaphor. It is so straightforward. So good. So then, is this a way, like how you communicate PR metrics and reporting to stakeholders if they're not familiar, with the industry?
Yeah, you do sort of have to, and I don't mean this in a sort of derogatory fashion, but you do have to simplify things because they're nowhere near as interested or invested in these reports as say I am or my direct boss who's director of communications. They just want to know, give it to me straight. Did we get into anywhere that people read? Is it a good publication? What did they just want real basics. So if I can give them that, we were in Time magazine. We were in Time magazine, by the way. Already Time magazine. Wow. That's enough for them to sort of get the gist of why we do what we do. So yeah, I do simplify it for them. I cut out a lot of the analytics, but boil it down to its, basic, Are we going to get from A to B this month? Yes or no. And we need to do this. Yeah, yes, this is why, and no, this is why. So, as long as you've always got the data to back you up, you can be simplistic about how you explain things to people, and they'll see that sort of, kind of curious look in their face. Then you bring out the report, the big guns. Then you bring out the analytics, and you bring out the Excel sheets. Then you see the horror on their faces. No, it's okay. I get it. Okay, off you go.
That's so funny. So how do you use these metrics just to evaluate your individual team members' performance or agencies?
Yeah, so it's agencies mostly for me. I use it in a very basic fashion. When you work with agencies, generally speaking, you work with them on a retainer basis, which buys you a certain number of hours per month. So I break those hours down into activities. It's very, very rudimentary, but it does give you an idea of where are those hours being put. Then you look at your results and you can say, right, for this activity, they spent 3 hours on corporate press releases, 1 hour on customer stories, 7 hours on news hijacking, and this is what we got. So you've got your ROI, sort of from the financial side, and then you've got your performance metrics. And when you marry the two, you can see whether the agency is strategic, using its time properly, is guiding itself from last month's results, and so on and so forth. So it's a tool that just keeps on giving. Again, reports. Without them, you'd run into situations where you can't substantiate why you are maybe unhappy with the outcome of something, why you're questioning their work in a month, because unless you truly understand what they're spending their time on, you really are in no position to criticize them, because they'll believe that they're doing something right, and until you can have a look at the facts, then you really ought to not say anything at all. So again, I highly recommend producing reports. Keeps everybody honest, and nobody's offended, because you just look at it in a very rational manner. Oh, we spent this much time on corporate releases, but we didn't get much from them, so maybe next month let's not spend that much time on them. That's a far more productive conversation to have than that defensive, accusatory type of approach, which doesn't really get anyone very far.
Yeah, very straightforward and data backed up criticism, I guess. I mean,
it's constructive. Yeah,
makes perfect sense. So can you provide us with an example of a PR campaign that was particularly successful, or your favorite of yours, and the metrics that you use to measure them?
Well, actually, I've sort of referenced it already. It's we do an annual report on women professionals in the workplace. I mean, I've got loads of these examples, but this one's quite recent to me, so I can remember it better. But we did a global survey of 4,000 women in those hubs where we have PR. There's absolutely no point creating reports where you don't have PRs, because how are you really going to get it into the press? It doesn't happen by accident. So, it was phenomenal, really. We had some incredible insights come through. Nothing that would majorly surprise anyone, because we all know that there isn't really parity, but we need to see, has there been progress? So these sorts of reports surfaced a lot of very interesting results for women professionals in these particular countries, and every country had a slightly different set of issues and slightly different set of things that were going well. On its own, that sort of study is of huge interest to press. But when you then couple it with activating it just before Women's History Month and Women's International Day, then you've got a real captive audience. So it's not rocket science. Any study that has, or anything that's substantive, that really gives, data-led, sort of almost scientific backing to an opinion or a position, coupled with what press love, which is tell it to me when it's relevant, really relevant, then we've got a deal. And that's exactly what happened. So we had over 45 pieces of coverage globally in those hubs that I talked about, which is not easy to get. Generally speaking, you get in the teens if you're lucky, sort of low teens. 45 pieces of coverage, of which a good, I would say about 40% were what I call premium titles. So they're the business dailies, the Telegraphs of the world. We were in Forbes in the US editorially, which is not easy. So that did really, really well. And it's a combination of quality and then strategy of saying, well, let's do this in advance of Women's International Day, and we'll have, the ears of the press and the audiences that want to know. So that worked very, very well. I hit all the metrics. We had quantity and quality. So, I could sort of hang up my clogs and go for a nice long weekend after that. I didn't, but
you should have, as a reward.
I should have done that, yes, and I will soon. But it's still giving. It's still giving. We're still in March, just about, and we still are able to provide quotes from that in different, quality papers that are still writing about certain issues to do with the, gender parity, etc. So yeah, very useful kind of campaigns. Those, yeah.
That sounds awesome. I love that research, and would love it if you could share it with me, so I can also put it in the description if somebody wants to read more about it.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. Yeah,
that'd be great. So next, I wanted to ask you, how do you balance this need, for creativity with data-driven decision making and just innovation in these PR campaigns?
Yeah, that's a tough one, because of course you're caught between the business, needs and then your own understanding of really how press works. So what I tend to do is I put the creativity into things like thought leadership, and so that's separate to opinion pieces. Opinion pieces, you can still tie it back to a brand, a specialist in a certain area, but from a brand, so X from HiBob, so you still get that brand awareness. But you can get all sorts of creative if you go into thought leadership, because you don't always necessarily need to substantiate that as much. Nor do you really with opinion, but opinion lands better if you can substantiate it. So, for example, we recently placed what we call a byline, a thought leadership piece on the role astrology has to play in hiring practices. I mean, it's kind of, a bit out there. It's a bit quirky. You wouldn't just do that. That would not fulfill the PR program for a brand that's looking to, increase brand awareness and sell product. But it certainly gave the spokesperson, who was the HR lead this is a US magazine that we placed it in, it gave her profile a massive boost, because it's the sort of story that people kind of, you're scrolling through, astrology and hiring, why wouldn't we read about that? So you can get creative. With PR, you're creative with your words and your thoughts. It's not an image-led, at least not in my opinion. It's not an image-led function, not like marketing. So marketing has a lot more wiggle room to become really, sort of visually creative. But for us, it's all in the words and thoughts. And yeah, I take my opportunities in these sorts of quirky pitches for bylines, and some of them land and some of them don't. But it's a bit of an indulgence, because you're usually quite busy with the business of the day, But where we have that time, we do take it. Yeah.
That sounds fun. So how do you ensure that these metrics align with your business goals and objectives?
Well, there's no smoke and mirrors about that one. You have to start with planning, usually towards the end of the year, previous to the one that you're planning for. So around November time, you sit down with all the business leads, the CEO, the CFO, the sales guys, the product people, and you talk about the company mandates and imperatives for the following year. And you will get a lot of business speak. You'll get increased revenues, ARPU, geo expansion, those sorts of things that the C-suite talk about. But it does inform where, which products are launching next year. So all of that, you take that information and you craft your plan around that. There are very set assets for PR. You've got corporate comms, you've got thought leadership, you've got campaigns, and you've got press office. So however we activate the support will fall into one of those categories. And within those categories, they have their own special assets. So is it a news piece? Is it a thought leadership piece? Is it a campaign? Is it a survey? So you're able to find ways to bring to life all the imperatives that a business is looking to fulfill through, a clever and strategic PR program. So for ARPU, for example, so increased use of a platform is to do more case studies where people talk about how they use capabilities. If you read about other people using it, you are more likely to use it. If you already have that product, or even if you don't, might be encouraged to do a bit more delving into it. So there is always a way. Geo expansion, right? Okay, so we need to support the marketeers out there and the salespeople out there. But let's start with talking about the fact that we opened an office in X, Y, and Z. Let's start there. Then start to profile the country managers there. We did that for Germany quite successfully within sort of 6 months of opening an office. So everything has a corresponding program, if you like, within the PR function. But it just is a case of sitting down, getting your information, and then using your knowledge or experience to put these plans together. and hopefully then integrating it with the rest of the marketing plans as well. Then it
Hopefully.
becomes really holistic. Yeah, hopefully,
Yeah.
because some people just go off on their own tangents, and you find out, oh, you're doing an event there. Oh, would have been good to know. But so, but that's up to you as well to talk to your peers and say, well, what plans have you got? So it does take a time. It's worth taking time over it, so that by January, you've got a plan, and you share that with your PR agencies, and off they go to make their wonderful, magic with it.
Yeah. How far in do you plan into a year? So by January, how far back are you already planned up? Like until March, June, July, half of the year, or like the whole year?
No, the whole year, because there are things for sure are going to happen. There are things need to happen. You might not have the information yet, but that once a quarter, you've got to at least have some customer story. Once a quarter, there's going to be an analyst report that you can talk about, a couple of campaigns, so you put placeholders in. But then, yes, it's best to work in quarter chunks, because it's always a work in progress and always subject to change. But at least if you've got this high level view of, all right, yeah, but in October, right, we know for a fact that this is happening. So let's, be prepared for it. It works better than, this sort of ad hoc random, and another thing, because and we need it for next week, it doesn't work as well. It's very, 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 very hard to get into the press. I keep telling people, very, very hard. So the sooner you can plan, the better you make your content, you will maximize your chances of success.
Yeah, like you said, like you mentioned the campaign for Women's Month. Like when did you start creating this?
November for March. We started talking about the questionnaire. Before that, and then in January it was finalized and put out into the field. We got the results back in January, and we spent the tail end of January and halfway through February putting the reports together, so that by the middle of February our PR agencies were able to start selling it in. Because something like a report, journalists want to read it. They wouldn't have time to read it first and sort of digest it. They're not just going to, here it is, quickly write it up. That's not their job, and they're not going to do that. So you have to take the time to do things properly. My favorite mantra is do less better. I've never managed it yet, but do less better. I really wish that one day that's exactly what we will end up, being able to take our time and luxury over certain things.
I'm sure you will. So you've been in the industry for quite a while now. So how has this use of data in PR reporting evolved throughout the years, and what do you anticipate will happen in the future?
Gosh, it's become very sophisticated. When I first started out, you'd print, you'd print your clippings, you'd fax them to your client, and that was it. The clipping had the name of the article, the publication, and the reach. And if you wanted to get really sophisticated, you would give them the average, the advertising equivalent value, which, at the time was, I suppose, considered a good measure. It was purely on cost. I think it was, that's where we were at the time. What's this costing me? Not what do I get from it and that sort of thing. But since then, forget about it. I find that people almost don't even bother looking at the clipping itself. They want to see the impact of that clipping, so did it lead to branded search? What is the SEO rank of that domain? What's the influencer score? Honestly, it's the last thing that people sometimes, it's remarkable to me, actually, when I say, but did you read the piece though? It was good, wasn't it? And they're like, oh yeah, I'll read it. I will read it. I'm just looking at the, I just want to know how many leads that got me. So it's become really, really sophisticated. People are very, very focused on, those deliverables, the commercial deliverables, the MQLs, the SQLs. I learned this now just in the last few years. Marketing qualified leads, sales qualified leads. This never came into our vocabulary when 10, 15 years ago. So it's become really sophisticated, because it's increasingly difficult to justify the cost of anything.
Yeah.
PR isn't particularly more expensive than any other activity in marketing, but it is a cost, and it is a cost center. So we need to start showing, this is how it's evolved, that we're a strategic function that is also driving revenue, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So not just to be seen as a cost center, like a necessary evil, but that actually there's a strategic, revenue generating purpose behind it. But that's here already. That's already here. You can see from the way we report now, that's already there. But I think the future will, for me, I'm keeping a very close eye on AI and
Mm-hmm.
things like chat GPT,
Oh,
those sorts of
yes.
things. That's going to change, not so much. Well, I actually don't know how it's going to change PR for us, because both from the aspect of how content is going to be written in the future, will journalists use chat GPT? Will they just plug a press release in and say, write the story, corresponding to this news, news release, or will it be used in a different way? So I'm very curious to see where that all leads, and
It'll be very interesting to see how it develops.
So I really don't know the answer about the future, but that's where my focus is. I'm watching that closely. I think it's
And
going to be a force for good if it's used properly,
mhm.
and all the flaws are fixed. So we're a ways away from it, but let's see. Well, maybe not that ways away from it. It's just incredible
I
to
mean,
me what it can do.
what happened last week with Microsoft's Copilot and the Midjourney that creates images and so many things, have been evolving in the past weeks. I'm honestly, I think probably a lot of these other companies are already planning. They're already been working on it. So I think a lot of things will happen in the next couple of months. It feels like companies have been like investing a lot of time and money into this. So I think we're going to be
Yeah.
surprised even more
Yeah,
in the couple of.
I wouldn't be surprised if we ourselves, as PR people or content providers, have to write differently, because it's then
Mhm.
going to be fed through the chat GPT or AI lens once it
Sure.
reaches, the recipient. So I don't know. Interesting times, really.
Yeah,
And
very interesting. I feel like we're going to be able to produce a lot more. Maybe we'll spend a bit less time on these some of these tasks that usually, like research, for example. I feel like this part would be very beneficial for everybody in content production. To get all this info, because it collects everything for us and just kind of systemizes it for the topic that we need and the angle that we want. So I feel like that's very
exactly.
big in our industry.
Yeah, no, I do see a lot of benefit to that. Humans will always be needed, at least for the next little while,
Mhm.
because one thing that the technology doesn't have is the ability to then strategize around and create
Mm.
those bespoke plans. So thank goodness for that, because we'd all become obsolete, so to speak, or we'd need to upskill or reskill. But
Yeah.
yeah, in terms of taking away the mundanity of some of the tasks, or the anything that's a bit repetitious, I welcome anything that frees you up to become more creative or more strategic.
Mhm.
So yeah, so I watch that space with interest. We'll see where it takes us.
Definitely. Is there anything else you would like to add on our topic of PR metrics and reporting?
Gosh, no, no, not other than to say, honestly, reporting is good. And I highly encourage people to, get good data and put it into reports that become good reports. So you will never go wrong if you've got a good old report to back you up when you need to make a case. So yeah, that's all I would say about that. Thank goodness for reporting platforms that provide us with the analytics and do all the legwork for us, because it would be a very, very tiresome job otherwise.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Natalie, for sharing your insights. This was incredibly insightful. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I hope has been useful.
It has for me so much. I've learned so much for this through all the things that you've mentioned because we've been doing a little bit of both in content, and this has been very very insightful for me. And thank
Oh,
you so much
good.
for that.
I'm glad. Well, it's a pleasure anytime. And I very much enjoy using the platform that I use. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to mention it, but it's very good. So I'm very happy with it. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to learn more about this topic that we just discussed about, head over to our website for additional resources and information. If you enjoyed this episode of our podcast, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and Spotify. See you in the next episode. Bye.